Hello and welcome to Formula Pulse's highs and lows from the Mexican Grand Prix. We're going to be taking a look at who aced it over the course of the Mexican Grand Prix weekend and who had a weekend to forget. Let's get started with the teams and drivers who would have been having a few tequilas after the race on Sunday. First up, it's Red Bull, with Max Verstappen ending up winning the race and Sergio Perez taking a home podium in front of his adoring fans. Heading into the weekend, this was the result that everybody expected. The high altitude always suits Red Bull, but the form book seemed to be thrown out the window on Saturday as they struggled with the balance issues and then they tripped over each other and Yuki Tsunoda in the final run in Q3. And although this handed the advantage to Mercedes, we still got the result that was expected on the Sunday. Verstappen got a good start and then was brilliant on the brakes into turn 1 to take the lead and then controlled the race from then on. And it was probably as comfortable as a race as he's had all season. And this result ended up extending his championship lead over Lewis Hamilton to 19 points with just 4 races to go. And of course, it was a home podium for Sergio Perez and the first time in his career that he's taken 3 podiums in a row. But I do wonder if this might leave them feeling slightly conflicted, as the pace was there to finish second, as shown by Perez's pace when he was harrying Hamilton at the end. In fact, if they had stopped the lap after Hamilton, that was probably their best chance of nabbing P2 away from the reigning champion. Hamilton had come out in traffic which had held him up, and Perez may have got the move done then and there had they not left him out longer into the race. And I feel I should give a word on Hamilton. I think Mercedes were clearly second best in the race, so to finish P2 was the maximum result possible. And I think it's an especially decent result for Hamilton considering Bottas looked the quicker of the two Mercedes all weekend, so splitting the Red Bulls was probably the most he could have hoped for. Mercedes said before the race that they'd been working on a fix for their high altitude issues, and they were definitely closer to Red Bull than people expected, and of course they were able to lock out the front row as well, so that may give them some hope that they can fight back when we get to Brazil in a week's time. But still, this is definitely a big win for Red Bull, with Verstappen now very close to being a win ahead in the Drivers' Championship. Red Bull are also just a point behind Mercedes in the Constructors' Championship as well, after Bottas was wiped out on turn 1. So this was a very, very good day's work for Red Bull in Mexico. Now I'm going to give the second high of the weekend to Pierre Gasly. Last time out I said it was Charles Leclerc that was the invisible man in 4th, but it was definitely Gasly that took that crown today. The Alpha Tauri was working brilliantly around Mexico City, benefiting from that Honda engine that seems to really suit the high altitude, and he finished a very lonely 4th, but finishing ahead of both Ferraris was definitely a brilliant result and another one that could be rated as Gasly's best race of the season. And even more crucially for Alpha Tauri, they've been chipping away at Alpine's lead in the Constructors' Championship, and they're now level on points with the French squad in that fight for 5th place. And you'd also say that they've got the momentum to really take the fight to them in the final races. Another man who had a really fine day in Mexico was Kimi Raikkonen, with one of his best drives of the season. I mentioned after Austin how Alfa Romeo had been squandering points by just finishing outside the top 10, but here Raikkonen didn't waste the opportunity that came to them. He was able to start higher up the grid due to the number of grid penalties, and he took full advantage. He actually ran behind Antonio Giovinazzi early on, but the Italian stopped early, which in the end proved to be the wrong strategy, with Raikkonen running much longer into the race and then emerging ahead of his teammate. Along the way to this great result, he put a nice move on George Russell into the first corner, and he also held off Fernando Alonso and Lando Norris behind to pick up some handy points for the team. It was a solid if unspectacular day for Raikkonen's former employers Ferrari. They did pick up an 18-point haul for finishing in 5th and 6th, and that gives them a sizable lead over McLaren heading into the final rounds. But I did expect Ferrari to be a little bit stronger here, and in particular I think they'll be left wondering why they weren't able to challenge Gasly for that 4th place. The most notable part of the race was Sainz being frustrated behind Leclerc, leading to the two swapping places and then back again before the end of the race. Sainz even suggested at one stage that Leclerc was making mistakes on purpose to hold him up, and the last thing they need now, having taken the lead ahead of McLaren, is for the cracks to appear in an otherwise strong relationship. Ferrari now seem to have the pace and the momentum in that fight for 3rd, and it's going to take something special from McLaren to get back on terms with the Scuderia. One bright spot in an otherwise disappointing day for McLaren was Lando Norris, who returned to form by working his way through the field from 18th to 10th. He was the biggest mover in the race, and he finished ahead of Ricciardo, who had a day to forget. And I want to finish the highs with a couple of honourable mentions. So Sebastian Vettel had an anonymous day just like Pierre Gasly, but it was a really strong result for the German, who finished in 7th place, his best finish of the season since Spa, or his best finish since Baku if we're counting actual races. And a very surprising mention for Nikita Mazepin, who actually ran on the fringes of the top 10 early early on after a really good start. Okay, so now let's move on to who had a day to forget in Mexico, starting with Daniel Ricciardo. Daniel, things have been going so well lately, but on a day where Ferrari finished 5th and 6th and when Norris started at the back, McLaren really needed Ricciardo up there. And he actually did a great job in qualifying to split the Ferraris, but then it all went wrong at the first corner. He tagged Valtteri Bottas into turn 1, which obviously ruined both of their races. This led to a stop at the end of the first lap, and he then dropped to the back of the field with the Finn. He did do some good defensive work against him, but in the end he could only manage to fight back through to 12th place. This leaves McLaren with some real work to do in their fight for 3rd place, and Ricciardo could have limited the damage with a strong result here, so it's really disappointing that he wasn't able to score any points after that collision. The next low has to go to the man that Ricciardo tagged at turn 1, Valtteri Bottas, who had an absolutely disastrous day. After a stunning lap to beat the Red Bulls and Hamilton to pole, he was the only driver in qualifying who really got hold of the balance of the car in Q3, but his race went downhill after he was tagged by Ricciardo. The team brought him in for a fresh set of hard tyres, but then he ended up stuck behind the Australian for another 40 laps. There's no way that Ricciardo is going to be on Bottas's Christmas list after this. And when Ricciardo finally boxed and Bottas had a chance to get through, his own stop was painfully slow, ending up at around 11 seconds. This brought him back out behind Ricciardo and well down the pack and out of the points. The only consolation for his dismal day was that he was able to take fastest lap away from Verstappen, but that was only after having to pit another 2 times for soft tyres. After possibly one of his best days for Mercedes on Saturday, it really was a dismal Sunday for Valtteri Bottas, although a lot of it was hardly through no fault of his own. Another driver I feel we should spare a thought for after that race was Yuki Tsunoda. He ended up being the scapegoat for the mess in qualifying, but I'm not sure that he was really to blame. He did his best to get out of the way, and it was more about his positioning on the circuit than actual through any fault of his own. And it's really unfortunate in the end because Gasly showed that there was pace in the car to finish P4, and Tsunoda had had a good weekend up to that point, reaching Q3 again. And things didn't get any better on race day, and he was taken out in the first lap chaos. So this whole weekend goes down as a low for the Japanese driver, but I'll be honest, I don't think it's through any fault of his own. So the Mexican Grand Prix leaves things finely balanced with 4 races to go. Verstappen has the advantage in the Drivers' Championship, but Lewis Hamilton could still claw it back. There is still time. And in the Constructors' Championship, things are finely balanced with 1 point separating the top 2. Sergio Perez is also closing down Valtteri Bottas in the Drivers' Championship for 3rd place, and the fight is on between McLaren and Ferrari and between Alpine and Alpha Tauri in the Constructors' Championship. Let us know your thoughts on the Mexican Grand Prix in the comments, and we'll be back for more highs and lows after the Brazilian Grand Prix next weekend. Thanks very much for watching.